Scotland and South Africa this weekend. It's a pretty big game, folks. We're going to go through the squads, some of the recent results, predictions, stats, and you guys can let me know your thoughts on how this one may pan out. It's ranked number 7 Scotland up against rank 2 South Africa. Scotland are at home, obviously, at Murrayfield. They're coming off the back of a pretty good win over the Wallabies, albeit a hard-fought one. 15 points to 13 last week, and importantly, it was on a Sunday. So we've got a short turnaround for the Scots this week. The Springbok guys, they were having their first game last week. It was a tough one away to Wales, but they got the job done, 23 points to 18. So, both sides kind of coming off winning runs. South Africa with a win over the All Blacks, and then Wales, and Scotland, it's Tonga, and now Australia. So, both sides should be full of confidence and ready to go into this one, all guns blazing. For Scotland, they have made a few changes, and it's kind of to be expected with, as I mentioned, the short turnaround. They've still got the same props in Schoeman and Fagerson, so they'll be under the pump at scrum time, because if you noticed during the Wales game, that Welsh scrum was a real area of concern for Wales and a real area of dominance for the Springboks. But that being said, the same was true of the Scots against the Wallabies, albeit the Wallabies had a couple of their tight heads go off at certain times in the match. So, that's going to be a really interesting area to see who kind of gets on top there, because both sides, I think, have got pretty good scrums. McInally comes in at hooker. So, it's kind of good to have that experience back for him. Skinner and Gilchrist is the same second row. Haining, Ritchie and Fagerson is a changed back row, because Hamish Watson played last week, but he's one of those guys that I think Gregor Townsend has kind of said has played 2 games in a row. He was coming back from an injury when he did play against Tonga, and I think it's a size thing, partially. Partially it's the the short turnaround of the fitness and whatnot, but he basically said with a few of the guys that he's changed, as he's looking to play a few bigger bodies. So Nick Haining, I'm not sure how much bigger he is than Hamish Watson, probably a few kilos and a few centimetres, but he's there at 6. So Ritchie switches to 7, and Matt Fagerson's still there at 8. Ali Price and Finn Russell are the 19 combo. So I know South African media was talking them up a lot when they were having the press conference with some of the Springbok guys about kind of how you're going to shut this down and the big attacking threat of the Scots. But they also mentioned that the Scottish guys can also play conservative as well, so they're not kind of taking anything for granted as to how the game is going to play out. Matt Scott and Chris Harris is a changed midfield, so Scott has come in for Sam Johnson, who's played a couple of weeks, and it's another one where I think Gregor basically said he's a wee bit bigger and he's a bit fresher because of the short turnaround. So with the likes of Damian Allende in the Springbok ranks, it's kind of to be expected that he wants to pick a guy who's solid on defence. Rufus, McLean and Duhan van der Merwe are the wings, so there's no Darcy Graham this week. With Rufus's inclusion, Gregor basically said he wants someone who's going to be good on the kick chase, which could be indicative as to how they're going to play, and he's secure under the high ball, so maybe a bit of extra height compared to Darcy. And then Hogg is captain at 15. The bench is pretty stable. Ashman, Bhatti and Kebble's the same guys from last week. I mean, Ashman had a pretty good shift, didn't he, with a nice wingers try in the corner for a hooker. Hodgson and Watson, as I mentioned, Watson's down to the bench. Horne, Hastings and Kinghorn is back in the 23 after sitting out last week, but he played the week before against Tonga. So, we'll see how this changed Scottish lineup goes. For the Springboks, not so much in the way of changes. It's a bit more stable. I'm sure Springbok fans will be eager to see some of the guys who aren't getting game time, but they also want to kind of keep winning. So it's a bit of a balance, and they've picked maybe a slightly more conservative lineup than I would have seen, but maybe it's also kind of respect to the Scottish side that they are facing. Ox, Bongi and Trevor are the front row. That's Nche, Mbonampi and Inyakane. I'm not actually on a first name basis with any of those guys. As I mentioned, they gave the Welsh guys a pretty torrid time at scrum time, so they'll be looking to do the same against Scotland, but as I also mentioned, I think Scotland will be maybe a bit more stable in that area. Etzebeth and Mostert's the lock-in duo, so Mostert jumps up from the bench. Lut Diaka drops down. That's a bit of a change. I think I would prefer Lut, but Mostert brings a different game. He's got a huge work rate. I guess they expect him to be making a fair few tackles and maybe rely on Big Eben to do some more of the work in the air where Lut really excels. But either way, you kind of got 2 good players there. Kolisi is still captain. Kwaka is there, and Dwayne Vermeulen as well. So it's pretty stable. Only Mostert and Lut Diaka swapping are the changes in the forward pack. So yeah, it's pretty tidy, isn't it? For the backs, you've still got Herschel Yankees, but he's partnered this time by Elton Yankees. So Pollard drops to the bench. That's kind of one of the areas that Jacques Ninaba did mention that kind of they need to rotate the guys a bit. So you're not kind of focusing all the minutes into just that one guy. He also talked about Elton kind of needing to play his own game, but within the systems that the Springboks have. So that's always kind of the balance, isn't it? Because Elton's a pretty flashy player at times, but he's got to make sure what he's doing coincides with what the team is doing. So a bit of pressure on him because he's always under extra pressure for whatever reason. Maybe it's his haircuts throughout the years, but yeah, I hope Elton has a good game. Damian, Allende, Lukhanyo, Armour, same midfield. Those guys have been absolute stalwarts for the Springboks in recent times. They get the majority of the time for good reason. Mapimpi and Kriel are the wingers. Kriel maybe will look to get a bit more in hand. He didn't have a heck of a lot of chances last week. And Willie Roux is there at fullback. So it's another kind of step to the secure with him there, rather than giving a guy like Fussy a crack. They seem to be kind of biding their time with him. I know they wanted to give Willemse some time to really build on his game and the time they've invested in him, but he is injured. So that was really unfortunate for him. And yeah, so it's back to Willie. For the replacements, Marks, Kitsoff and Koch is the same front row. Numerous people have said it, including myself. That's better than many teams starting front rows, but you can bring that off the bench, so it's a pretty good weapon to have. Lut, as I mentioned, is there alongside Jasper Visa, who had a pretty good shift last week when he came on. Corbus Reinach added some real zip to the Springboks attack last week. He's there. Andre Pollard, as I mentioned, and Frans Steyn, who had to play the majority of the game last week and got man of the match, is still there on the bench too. So yeah, pretty good looking sides for both, you would probably say. I guess in terms of the stat stuff, obviously the Springboks kick the ball a fair bit, and they'll have to be secure under that high ball. For the Springboks, they've already talked about what Finn Russell brings to the game in terms of having to shut him down, but they're just going to stick to their system. I don't think, from what they said, they're not going to kind of make any special plans just for one kind of guy. If you stick to the system, then you should get the results. So that's going to be an interesting one to see. Scots like to play with a lot of possession. The Springboks are kind of middle of the road. They're not a team that I think the average is like 51% possession, so they slightly across their games have more ball than their opponents, but it's a bit of a mixed bag. So if they play without the ball, they'll be certainly tested, but it might create some opportunities on the counter for them. But then again, Scotland may play like they did against that game when they played England, and there was a bit of a low-scoring kick fest. So we'll kind of have to wait and see how all that plays out. Predictions-wise, the bookies have got the Springboks winning this one in a tight one by 5 points, and the rugby forecast algorithm likewise has it by the same margin of 5 points. So it's predicted to be a bit of an arm wrestle. But yeah, it will be interesting to see which side comes out on top. I think it is 2 p.m. local time, I believe, which is 2 a.m. over here in New Zealand. Same time as the Italy and Argentina match. I think it's 3 p.m. local time in South Africa. So yeah, not ideal time for those of us in New Zealand, but I'll be getting up to watch it sometime, whether it's live or whether it's later on in the morning. But anyway, should be a pretty fascinating one. Can the Scots get the first win over the Springboks in a while, or are the Springboks just going to kind of prove too strong? If you know about the Rayburn Shield, this one is also a Rayburn Shield defence for the Scots. The Rayburn Shield, which is that hypothetical trophy which traces its way back to the first ever Rugby International. Wallabies had it last week. Scotland took it, so now it's the Springboks' chance to get it back after losing it to the Wallabies in the Rugby Championship. Adds a bit extra spice to the game. Anyway, you guys let me know your thoughts. How do you think this one is going to go? And I will talk to you guys again soon. See you later.